Yo, yo, yo. Welcome to another edition of Your Therapist Needs Therapy, the podcast where mental health professionals talk about their mental health journeys and how they navigate mental wellness while working in the mental health field. I'm your host, Jeremy Schumacher, licensed marriage and family therapist. Today is a solo episode. I had some vague idea of recording an episode while I was at Pride, and that just did not pan out. One, because I was very busy talking to folks, which was great. And two, because I was pretty close to a stage, so I don't know that the audio quality would have been awesome. But we are going to talk about Pride. We're going to talk about protesting, talk about, mainly those two things. Some politics, and my experience at Pride this year, which was really lovely. So the first thing I'm going to talk about is just sort of a reminder that Pride began as a protest, and in 2025, under a want-to-be authoritarian regime, not even want-to-be, they want to be more authoritarian than they are. They are an authoritarian regime. People are being renditioned to other countries without due process. This is a big problem. I didn't say deported, because that's not what's happening. Language matters. People are being renditioned, kidnapped, and sent to other countries with no due process, which is a problem. And so the fact that it is June, the fact that we have protests going on across the country, planned protests for June 14th, No Kings protest, go to that. It'll be good for you. Find your local one and attend. We'll talk about protests in a little bit later. But Pride began as a protest. Pride began as a protest against an unlawful raid that specifically targeted Black and brown people, trans and queer Black and brown people. And I think that's really relevant now as a reminder that this isn't like the corporate entities that change their brand logos and their social media handles to rainbow colors for the month of June and then support Donald Trump the rest of the year. This is a protest by and for people in community. And so Pride parades are great to go to. The joy is palpable. The celebration is important. Having joy in community is a way to protest authoritarian regimes. They want us to be miserable. They want us to be isolated and separate. And so being joyful and celebrating in community is a great way to protest. But I think it's important to remember that it started as a protest and is still a protest as trans rights are being stripped away, and they will not stop there. The government, the Project 2025 plan is to overturn gay marriage rights, is to attack the rights of the LGBTQ plus community writ large. So it's not just about going after trans folks and their rights to healthcare and their rights to privacy and their rights to safety and their right to exist, but also the rights for gay people to exist, for gay couples to be able to adopt kids, for people to not be discriminated against for their gender expression, for whom they love in the workplace. All of those rights are going to be under attack soon. They are under attack now. They're just not the headline grabbing parts of it yet. Pride started as a protest because the LGBTQ plus community had been criminalized, was being brutalized by police officers, and was being told that they did not have a right to exist, pushing them to the margins of society and trying to keep them there and there only. And so Pride as a protest started as a way to push back against police brutality, but then became the celebration of we are here, we exist, we have a right to exist, and we're not going anywhere. And so that reality, I think, is important to ground ourselves in as to why Pride still exists. So I'm recording this I'm recording this on Monday. Milwaukee Pride just wrapped up. It was Thursday, Friday, Saturday. And it was really lovely, again, seeing people out and joyful and in community and feeling safe and loved in that community is really uplifting and important. And to see, we'll get into some of the other things. I was there professionally. Obviously, I've been to Pride for a number of years now, since I sort of became aware that I didn't fit a sort of binary understanding of sexuality, and going as an ally before that. So being at Pride as a professional was a little different. Um, yeah, I guess let's just go there now. So one of my specialties is religious trauma, obviously. So I went to Pride this year dressed as Jesus. For the sash around the robe, I wore rainbow colors to let people know that this wasn't a church. This wasn't to convert anyone or proselytize. I was not out there protesting Pride as some hateful, bigoted Christian, but I was there as gay Jesus, which is what most people referred to me as. So this is a podcast. Some of the imagery is lost, but I got long hair. I've got a beard. I made this joke a lot this weekend that I am what evangelicals wish Jesus looked like. And so I think being out there somewhat as a satire, somewhat skewering this idea of what evangelicals wish Jesus looked like, the Jesus that is talked about mythically in that book of myths known as the Bible, was a refugee. He would have been a Palestinian. He would have been small and brown skinned. And I'm 6'3", white. My hair is slowly bleaching back to blonde for the summer here. Not at all what the mythical Jesus, if he had really existed, would have looked like. And so skewering that, having a lot of fun with that, and then putting the rainbow flag around so that people knew I was safe and that they could come up and talk to me. I had a sign that said free religious trauma screenings as I was doing screeners for folks, trying to normalize the conversation around religious trauma, both as a thing that deeply affects the queer community, and as a thing that I think just people in the Midwest don't talk about enough. So just I think it's highlight the prevalence of how important this topic is. I forgot business cards. I have ADHD. So I forgot my business cards on Thursday. Friday, I remembered them, but left them in my car. And so about half of Friday, I had business cards. So probably about 5, maybe 3 hours on Friday and all day Saturday from noon till about 8 p.m. I had business cards with me, probably somewhere around 150 cards, and I ran out. So lots of people came up and talked to me and took a card with them. I was also doing the screening. We had over 60 responses to the screener, the virtual version, the digital version of the screener. I didn't count up how many pen and paper responses I had. A lot of people who did pen and paper kept those, but so, this was, I'm going to give you some data points, but understand this is not real research. This is not something that I did to do research. This is not something that I was interested in publishing. This is not how I would do it if I was interested in doing research. This is just raw data with a very small sample size from a very skewed population. This is not how to do research. This is not research. I am merely sharing some data to put perspectives in. I had a very busy week. I was there for about 5 hours on Thursday, about 6 hours on Friday, and 8 hours on Saturday. Ran out of business cards, as I mentioned. Got over 60 responses for the screener. And I just think it's interesting, as a psychology nerd and a research person, like somebody who studied research a lot. I went to University of Minnesota, which is top 3 research institution in the nation. I know a lot about research. I know a lot about how it's done. And again, this is not that, but the raw data is interesting in the sense of we need more research on the topic of religious trauma, which is something that I talked to people about, saying, we don't have a lot of research. The screener I use is adapted from the adverse childhood experiences, the ACEs test, which is how we work with childhood trauma and how that can get diagnosed, and some of our understandings of complex trauma. So it fits for studying religious trauma, but again, like we just don't have a lot of research on it. So a few things, again, not research, but raw data that I'm going to highlight. A small sample size. This is something that needs to be researched more, but if someone out there listening wants to do the research, here's where I would say we could start. So over nearly 85% of respondents said that, checked yes to, have you ever felt that God does not love or accept you because of what you were told in a religious setting? Again, I'm asking this question at a Pride event. So this is for people who are going to be openly or allied with the LGBTQ community. Have you ever felt that God does not love or accept you because of what you were told in a religious setting? Nearly 85% of respondents said yes to that. And like, I talked to plenty of people this weekend who are still religious, who are still affiliated with the church. I talked to a number of pastors. I talked to a number of preachers. I talked to a number of people who have found a welcoming, safe, inclusive space within their chosen religious path. And like, that's awesome. It's not for me. But like, finding community is hard. And if that's where your community lies and there is meaningful connection, that's great. I love that. But for those people who are like, why do people recoil when I say I'm Catholic? I love gay people. I think Jesus is love. Jesus would have loved everyone. Jesus would have been at a Pride event. Well, they're responding poorly to you saying you're Catholic because of this. Like, because Catholicism writ large, what the Pope has said is that homosexuality is a sin and therefore requires that you go to hell. So I think obviously, you know, the people who are still identifying as Catholic and going to Pride as a celebration wouldn't agree with that. But I think if we're looking at it factually here, like, that's what the Pope says. And if the leader of your religion says it, like, that's what everybody else is going to respond to. The Pope still gets headlines. The Pope is having an event on the day that Donald Trump is trying to have his little military parade because he's an actual dictator, you know? So like, the Pope still gets headlines. The Pope still draws crowds. The Pope is still the leader of the largest religious group on the planet, which is Catholics. The Pope hasn't spoken out against the Catholics colonizing that much of the world, you know, still deeply problematic. 83% of respondents felt that God does not love or accept you because of what you were told in a religious setting. The other really high percentage question, also at 83%, do past experiences now make it difficult for you to attend or participate in religious or spiritual communities? 83% of people said yes to that question. And again, raw data. This is not pure research. This is just a screening tool. It's not diagnostic in any way, shape, or form. The people who filled out the screeners responded at a high percentage to that question. Past experiences make it difficult to engage. That doesn't say in the religion you were born in the religion you were raised in. It just says religious or spiritual spaces. And again, I think that's really relevant. I'm reading The Disappearance of Rituals by Byung-Chul Han. He's a philosopher, and he talks way too fondly of religion and ignores its very many problems. And his takes on mental health are really poor. And what he has to say about ritual disappearing is I think, valid as well. I think he makes a lot of good points about ritual spaces have predominantly been tied to religion, and people don't have as much ritual as they used to. As a religious trauma therapist, I talk to a lot of people, like, ritual's a dirty word for a lot of them. It was a dirty word for me for a long time. I just associated it with, I was raised evangelical Lutheran, the very dry, lifeless, passionless rituals that I grew up with, which was a German Lutheran upbringing on the pipe organ, and a praise band was sinful, and communion is this dry, somber thing. Everything's somber. So all the rituals that I grew up in the church were like really dry and boring. But even for people who grew up, like, some of those rituals are still really powerful and meaningful, not because of the church, but because ritual is meaningful. The church uses ritual because our brains are wired to respond to it. I talk about ritual now as like an embodied practice. And so giving our brain and our body time and space to experience something simultaneously can be really healing. Obviously, for folks with trauma, if they associate that with a space that was unsafe, if something that harmed them, yes, they're going to check a box on this screener that says, I'm hesitant to engage in spiritual spaces now because of my past experiences. That's what trauma is all about. This is a trauma screener. So, but I think it's really relevant to know that, like, the harm that's done in that is lasting, and it limits some of the healing that can happen for folks, because ritual especially ritual in community, can be a really healing process. A community that is safe, that is loving, that is accepting, that is safe. I know I'm saying it twice, but like to really highlight that safety has to happen first. Like ritual is an embodied practice. It is a way to acknowledge something, to validate something, to let your body and brain participate in something together, to like linger. That's the word Byung-Chul Han uses, is lingering, is dwelling, a way that we can exist in space for a while, in time for a while. It slows down in ritual. Again, he uses that word lingering, and he talks about dwelling. The difference between an empty house and a home is that someone lives there. That's what ritual is with time. It's time in which we can dwell in our bodies, in our communities, and not just production based, not just move through it to get to the next thing, but to just experience it. Ritual is experiential, and that's why ritual can be so healing. So again, I think like as something that needs to be studied more, as something that reflects like the failures of religious groups now that have failed to have accountability, have failed to maintain safe spaces, have let abuse go on and on and on and propagated it. The new pope has defended priests who rapes children, like to a distressing degree. He's already done it before he was pope. So like that's not going to change the amount of the millions of dollars the Catholic Church spends on fighting lawsuits and making sure that victims cannot sue the church is going to continue, right? And so religious spaces remain unsafe, and like that's super valid. I understand what people are in that space. 77% of respondents said yes, that they were pressured to act against your values, emotions, or morals due to religious expectations. 77% of respondents said, have you ever felt unsafe, anxious, or angry while attending religious events or being around religious people? So again, like really high percentages there. 70% of respondents said they've been shamed, humiliated, or excluded in a religious setting. 68% of people have strong or distressing memories related to past religious experiences. 65% of respondents said they participated in religious practices or experiences just so to avoid exclusion. So again, like a lot of high percentages here from raw data. It's not a research study, this is a screener. And I just think like this research would be really helpful for people to know like their experience is valid, that like it's not just like church hurt. That's a word that church people use a lot to like explain away these hurts, is like, oh, well, that's because you had a bad pastor or a bad priest, or like, oh, well, that's just because the church council there or the elders or the president or whomever was problematic. It's not the church. Like, no, it's the church. It's religion writ large. It's organized religion that does not take the time to build in safety, does not prioritize safety, and doesn't have any mechanism for accountability. I mean, I see this stuff every single week doing what I do as a therapist and being somebody who works with religious trauma specifically. I see the people who experience outright abuse, but I also see the people who were in the ministry for a long time and burned out because they weren't supported appropriately, because, you know, churches notoriously want volunteer work. They do not pay well. They are enjoying tax-free statuses on things like land and all these other stuff, while underpaying and under-resourcing the people who come through their doors or the people who keep their doors open. And so it doesn't surprise me at all that, you know, half of the respondent, you know, half of the questions had an over or around 70% response rate of, yes, I've experienced this adverse event that could lead to trauma. I would imagine that opening up this to a wider audience and researching it in an actual well-designed research study would keep these numbers quite high. I think most people experience some of these things, even if they're still religious. There was only one question that wasn't above 50% of respondents said yes. and for the curious folks out there, is, were you encouraged to return to a harmful or abusive situation by a religious authority, pastor, teacher, or religious council? That was a third of people said yes, which like is too high, right? Like that number should be 0. Ideally, religious people, stop doing that. Stop telling people that their safety isn't as important as your fragile little belief system. See, now I'm getting mad. Now I'm soapboxing. But like that's the only question that was below 50% yes on the response rate. So like, again, widespread issues across religions. I talked to lots of Catholics, lots of Christians, evangelicals, Pentecostals, Baptists, Methodists, Mormons, Jehovah's Witness, some people who name dropped very specific cults that they were raised in that because of my work I happen to be familiar with. But I don't know that I had a religious group that didn't get mentioned. I had people talk to me about like negative experiences in pagan spaces, in Buddhist spaces, in New Age spaces. So like, I'm gonna guess in a 3-day Pride event, I talked to people from every major religious background. I know there's like thousands upon thousands of religious backgrounds, so no, not all of them. I'm speaking in generalizations by saying the major ones, but that these issues are widespread and systemic. They are not a few bad apples. And just because I'm a language nerd, again, the idiom "a few bad apples" means a few bad apples spoil the whole bunch. The idea that people have used that to dismiss something is, again, how objectively stupid we've become as a society, that like pull yourself up by your bootstraps and a few bad apples are used to dismiss arguments when those idioms were based to show that like you cannot pull yourself up by your bootstraps. That's the point of the phrase. And that a few bad apples make everything worse. All cops are bastards. Religions harm people. Like, because of that, even it's not a few bad apples, it's systemic, it's widespread. But even if it were a few bad apples, that would still spoil the whole bunch. These institutions that harm people, organized religions that harm people, do not have accountability built in. So all of this is to say, Pride was lovely, even dressed as Jesus, which I was concerned would be triggering for some folks. Lots and lots and lots of people came up and talked to me. I had very little downtime, which was a good thing. Doing the screeners for folks, lots of people were surprised at how many boxes they checked. Lots of people were surprised that this was even a thing. They'd never heard of religious trauma before and wanted to learn more. I only had a handful, I will say 2 people, 3 people who came up and were like, godsthebomb.com, and I love him. And those were like the weirdest ones for me personally to interact with, just because like, A, that's not what I was there for. It was, you know, it said trauma screening right next to me in very large print on a very big sign. I talked to a number of mental health professionals, which is very cool, who were interested in learning more. Obviously, I got to promote the podcast a little bit. I just a QR code for Your Therapist Needs Therapy podcast and for my website, Wellness with Jer. So like sort of doing like, look at me, I'm a professional, check out all my stuff. But it was really good. I took, and more than people who came to talk with me, I took pictures with people. And that was just, again, like Pride is a celebration, Pride is a protest, like taking back the concept of like a loving God and saying, yeah, that God who is all loving would love you. If unconditional love exists from a deity, which again, like I'm not a believer, I'm an atheist, but like if that is a thing, then it goes to all people. If it is unconditional, then it is to everyone. And so I think that was really lovely and healing for a lot of folks. I had lots of people who just asked for hugs. I had people who were tearing up, who were crying, talking to me about stuff, and like just that healing connection, that human connection of giving a hug. Like that's why you go to Pride. Seeing lots and lots of people walking around with free mom hugs, free dad hugs. Like, to say, if you didn't have that parent who loved and supported you once you were out, once you were yourself, like, hey, we got you. We'll stand in that role. And that stuff's just really lovely. That stuff's so nice when you turn on the news and you see hatred and you see bigotry and you see extreme ideas of racism and transphobia and homophobia entering the mainstream, it's nice to see real people out in the real world showing love. And I think that's really meaningful. So, if Pride hasn't happened yet, if your local area hasn't celebrated Pride yet, like, go. I just encourage you to go. If you're part of the community, obviously go. If you're an ally, go. If you're a big white strapping dude, go to Pride, put on rainbow colors, and let people know that, like, it's safe to be around you. That matters. That matters. I can't tell you how many people I see in marginalized communities who are so nervous for their physical safety at all times. And the more of us who are safe to be around show up to these things, that matters, even if you're not part of the community itself. And I think, going to these things and attending these things, knowing what your role is also matters. Going as part of the community, it's super helpful and healing and lovely to go. If you're going as an ally, like knowing what that looks like, doing a little bit of learning and knowledge and listening to how your community is asking you to show up as an ally, I think really matters too. I'll also just say, like, the intersectionality of Pride is lovely to behold. Obviously, Pride is very much about sexuality, is about gender expression, is about loving who you want to love. And so we think of the LGBTQ plus community. But I saw people from all sorts of marginalized communities there. Ethnicities, different races, different backgrounds and origins, different kink communities, different people who are interested in showing publicly who they love and what that love can look like. And there was nothing sexualized. I don't want to say nothing. I saw some shirts that were obviously sexual in nature, but it wasn't something that was ever like uncomfortable. It wasn't acting out the kink. It was saying the kink exists and it has a right to exist, and it's consenting adults loving each other, and that in and of itself is lovely. Yeah, the intersectionality there again, and like that this community is not one thing, that this community intersects with all these other communities. I saw and talked to a number of people who were differently abled, the number of people who like identified as, like, I snapped my fingers there, as like, oh, you're ADHD too, and I'm a therapist, so I pick up on that pretty quickly. The number of people I saw with shirts that talked about their autism, like that stuff's so lovely. And again, like that these communities all intersect. Pride is not for, as like the quote unquote moral majority from the 1980s that has morphed into the fascist Christian right of today, of 2025, that wants you to believe that like this is hypersexualized perverts. Like, no, that's not what that means. Intersectionality fights back against that, and using that language helps us to say that like these communities exist everywhere across other communities as well. I saw real bougie folks. I've definitely spent time around the bougie gays who, are gonna spend a lot more money than I've ever been comfortable spending on for oysters for breakfast. Like, I spent time in those communities, and I saw people who, were thrilled that I was offering a support group that was a pay what you can model, and that nobody would be turned away for finances, because the community needs that. I talked to one lovely person who didn't have a phone and like was glad I had pen and paper. And I was like, my partner was like, hey, we'll mail you a postcard about the group, like whatever you need. And like, shout out to my partner A for like being there the whole weekend with me, which is a long time. But B for like, again, just, yeah, like we'll meet you where you're at. What do you need? Like, how do we help? And I think that part of community is just so needed and lovely when we talk about things like mutual aid. Like, yeah, that's part of it. Some of it is financial, a lot of it is love, a lot of it is human connection. Is it okay if I put my arms around you? Like, yes, like getting consent, all that stuff is so needed, and seeing that stuff put into practice by by just regular folks out there. These are not trained activists. These are not people who have studied these things extensively. These are just real people. These are your neighbors. I think that's really lovely. And I think progress has to include our most marginalized folks, the people who intersectionality might mean that they're in a marginalized community in every facet of their intersectional identity. And like, we can't leave those people behind. Civilizations are judged and only remain functional if they include their most marginalized, which is why America is such a failed experiment right now. And while it's falling off a cliff, it's because we are intentionally the leaders, the minority that is in charge of the government right now is intentionally pushing people to the side and acting as if they don't matter. And like, that's not how we can ever exist as a civilized society. So a little bit of a segue here into, yes, Pride is a protest. If you're going to specific protests, I mentioned the one coming up on the 14th, the No Kings protest, that is nationwide, that is done in juxtaposition to Donald Trump's planned military parade that's going to cost upwards of $90 million just so he can feel good about himself, because he has no other reason to feel good about himself, because he's an awful individual, a convicted rapist, and a felon. Best practices for going to protests, if you're going to go. Hydrate. I always tell people to hydrate. I'm a big believer in hydration. Rest in hydration. If you want to do something to improve your mental health immediately, rest and hydrate. But protesting, if you're going to a march, if you're going to a gathering, if you're going to be on your feet for a long time, if you're going to be out in the sun for a long time, hydrate and snacks. You need fuel to do this. Your body as a machine requires fueling. If you're bringing kids, if you're bringing elders, make sure that you're planning for rest stops. Know what route you're going to be taking. Look into that. Is there going to be stops along the way? Are there going to be water stations? Are there going to be medical stations? Know what you're signing up for before you're going. A lot of protests are well organized, and there are people who have thought through these things before you and have done this already. This is your first time going to some of that. These things exist. There are spaces for resting. There are spots for shade, but like, again, know sort of what your capability is in that and plan accordingly. I would say, from a protest perspective, from a digital safety perspective, to leave your phone at home. And if that is unsafe for some other reason, turn off your Face ID, turn off your fingerprint ID. If ICE shows up, if the National Guard shows up, two things that have happened this past weekend. We know ICE is not following the rule of law. They are the new, they are the new secret police who are not following other police rules. They are covering their faces. They are not identifying themselves. They are not having signed warrants. They are the secret police who are going around and renditioning folks without any due process. So to think that they will follow the rule of law is far too generous for them. We know they are not. They can force your finger onto your fingerprint. They can hold your phone up to your face. So if you're going to go out to a protest, turn those things off. If you can leave your phone at home and turn it off, that also hides your digital footprint a lot better. But the minimum you need to be doing is turning off those biometrics so that can't be used against you. Again, like wearing face protection, a breathing mask, eye protection. We're seeing, again, for no reason, people use the police in LA are shooting rubber bullets. Like, we're seeing it on camera. They're having their horses trample people, seeing it on camera without justification, without cause. So protecting your eyes, protecting your ears is very important in these things. Pepper spray is used regularly to disperse crowds. And those rubber bullets can do a lot of damage, actually, especially if they hit a soft part of your body, like an eyeball or an ear. So knowing those things, the police can ask you to move and can arrest you if you don't move. So again, knowing your rights, there's a lot of good information on the internet about these things. I just listened to, we'll put it in the show notes, a podcast, for an anarchist podcast talking about what your rights are. And they had a lawyer who specializes in these things on. So again, I am not a lawyer, I'm a mental health professional, but I see a lot of people who are actively organizing, going to protests and things like that. So these are the things that you need to sort of be aware of. Again, knowing where first aids and medics might be, having some basic de-escalation tactics. And again, like, be aware of your surroundings. If there are people who seem like they're maybe escalating things, or they're not actually there with the group and they're bringing bricks or they're doing whatever, like, be aware of that stuff. Those could be people who are trying to infiltrate the movement and shut it down. Be aware of any interaction you have around law enforcement is always smart. I think consensual practices are, like, again, not everybody wants to be recorded. Not everybody wants to be on camera. Know who you are catching on camera. Talk to them before you post stuff. Don't touch people's flags or signs without consent. I think that is good. Don't touch people without consent. Always a rule. If there are people who are organizing the event, listen to them. They are professionals. They are trained. They are people who are doing this because it's affecting them personally, and they're spending all their time and energy to lead the resistance. They know what they're doing. Please, please, please listen to them. The BIPOC community, trans and disabled organizers, are having to deal with these things a lot more than, like, people who look like me, white and male. So listen to people, show up to be helpful, show up to support, not to make it about yourself, not to fix a problem that other people have already spent a lot of time working to fix. You're not coming in with anything new. So listen to the organizers, and listen to where you can, like, direct your attention in a helpful way. And then again, like, pride is protest. Part of protesting is joy. Part of protesting is rest. We are protesting against an authoritarian fascist movement on the 14th, but we've been protesting against authoritarianism since Pride began. We've been protesting against capitalism for as long as it's been around. Like, resource yourself, bring joy, bring happiness, connect, hug, do all the things that bring you joy, that show your love, and also plan your rest and recuperation. Capitalism wants us to go, do, produce, consume. And so, not participating in that is also a form of protest. So, and make sure you're well-resourced. Your social groups, who else can you go with? Who are you connecting with for those things? We want to celebrate. We may need to have space for grief or rage or solidarity. So a wide range of emotions might be necessary, and making sure that you're well-resourced for that and that you have support for that. Those things are all really important. So I think being aware of all that stuff, if you're going out, please go to Pride, go support the LGBTQ plus community in your area. If you are a member of that community, congrats. I see you. You deserve to exist. You are loved. Go celebrate. Connect with your community. It's really uplifting. If you're an ally, go show up. It's super important. So yeah, and if you're going to protest, be smart. I'm going to put in the show notes some information about protesting, some resources, if you are to find yourself having an unfortunate interaction with law enforcement. Civil disobedience is an important right that we have. And when we don't have a true functioning democracy, protest is what we are left with. And so this stuff really matters. But it's a marathon, not a sprint. So protect yourself while you're doing this stuff. Make sure you're resourced so that you could keep showing up. Which is how I usually end my YouTube videos, which is take care of yourself, take care of somebody else. So very relevant. Celebrate Pride, find your joy. Take care of yourself while you're doing it. speaking of community building, I have some very cool guests lined up for future episodes. Have some of those recorded, some of those it's been rest and recovery, and now I'm getting back into the swing of things here for me following Pride. But if you're out at Milwaukee Pride and you came and took a picture, or you filled out a screener, or you are going to join our peer support group for religious trauma, thanks so much for stopping by. If you're tuning in to just the podcast here, thank you so much for that too. Likes, shares, leaving reviews, all that stuff helps more people find me and work with me. We're going to have signups for the peer support group, and more information for that is available on my website, which is wellnesswithjared.com. So yeah, a bunch of stuff in the show notes here if you want to scroll down and check that stuff out wherever you are listening. All right, y'all. Thanks for tuning in. Happy Pride Month to everyone. We'll be back next week with another new episode. Take care, y'all.